Once again, I go deep into my gaming library to pick out a game that I've never even heard of before seeing it on the shelf. Blowout, on PS2. To be honest, back when there was a game store local to me, RIP Planet Games, I've seen this game on the shelf and it just never appealed to me. The generic box art, the low budget cost, the screens on the back, it just didn't scream exciting to me. But when I had a chance to buy it for only a few dollars at a different game store I frequent, well, I couldn't pass it up. I had fun with it at first, but then the cracks start to show. In Blowout, you play as some guy who is nicknamed Dutch, and he's running around a space station that is infected with aliens. Yep, he's just there to stop them. The intro scene is pretty darn cool, but the story itself didn't really catch my attention. What can I say? I'm not a huge sci-fi nerd. From what I can read off the back of the case, you arrive at the space station to check out a clone uprising to find aliens. Okay then. From what I've played, they really don't mention anything else about clones, but to be fair, the story bored me, so I may have missed the references. But what I did enjoy at first was the gameplay. As Dutch, you run around 3D areas on a 2D plane, and the first thing that came to my mind when playing was that it was an homage to Contra. You primarily jump and shoot, and explore the large areas that the stage is comprised of. There are only 10 levels in the game, but from the first few I've seen, they can take anywhere from 20 to 40 minutes to complete, so it won't be over before you know it. Or maybe it will, depending on how good you are at the game. Dutch has a machine gun to mow down his threats, and of course it has unlimited ammo, although it will overheat if you lay on the trigger too much. Short, steady bursts seem to be the best course of action, but if you don't like that idea, there are other weapons you can find. Shotguns, rockets, flamethrowers, those sorts of things. Each one has its own ammo type, and switching between them are simple enough, using the triangle and circle buttons. This may sound odd, like why not use the shoulder buttons, but it works regardless. And speaking of odd controls, one thing that will take some getting used to is that X isn't used for jump. I know, crazy, right? Instead you use L1, and you really don't use it to jump. Instead, it's for your jetpack. At least, that's how the game phrases it, but in practice, it's an odd to use jump that basically allows you to hover for a limited height. Now, when you reach the max height, you can stay there indefinitely, but you just can't fly around the map at will. Again, it's a bit strange, but you'll get the hang of it. One thing I just couldn't get the hang of, however, is the shooting. You'd think it would be simple enough just to aim in the direction you want and fire, Contra style. So many other games have gotten it right. Blowout, though, is not one of those games. You see this little target thingy? That's your aiming reticule, and you move that around with the left analog stick. The same stick that is used to move. Can you already see the problem here? You move and aim with the same stick, so accuracy may be a bit of a problem. I didn't have a ton of issues with it at first, but when more powerful and numerous enemies start to appear, that's when you might run into some problems. The system should be decent since you can fine-tune your shots, but there are enough controls on the PS2 controller, not to mention the right stick isn't used at all. This is a horrible flaw, and it confuses me to no end on why the developers were to design their game to use this control scheme. I could get around all this though, since I was able to complete the first 2 levels with minimal trouble, so I figured I might be able to get to the rest of the game and just learn to live with it. But it wades into the 3rd stage and it all comes to a head. Between the lackluster non-shotgun weapons, the horrible aiming controls, and the fact that both enemies absorb a ton of damage and they deal massive blows to your health meter, and the game is going to get challenging very fast. I couldn't even get past the 3rd level. I'd make it about halfway through and then get swarmed by a bunch of enemies that would almost immediately kill me after touching me once. I swear there were even a few times where nothing was near me and I still died. You do have infinite lives, but the checkpoints are very sparse, seeming to be limited to areas where you open keycard doors. So it's very possible to have to restart and redo 10 minutes of progress. No matter how careful you are, I can't see many ways around dying, short of memorizing where each and every first aid kit is, along with using up all of your shotgun ammo to defeat all the enemies quickly. And no, you don't really have any invulnerability frames, so if you get hit and don't move, you can potentially fall in one attack. And no, you can't shoot through enemies, unless you're using a flamethrower, and that gun frickin' sucks. At least you can find some weapon upgrades. I've only found one, and it seems to increase every weapon in your arsenal, so each weapon won't have its own individual level ups. So be sure to keep blasting everywhere to find the hidden areas to hopefully find more. The bosses are kind of interesting too. Granted, I've only fought 2 of them, but they seem to be in an area where you can free roam and move the aiming cursor around on a vertical plane. It almost kind of feels like a restricted version of Space Harrier or something. The bosses do take a bunch of bullets to defeat, so you definitely want to get the hang of them quickly. And if you run out of ammo and only have your machine gun, it's going to take a while. Another thing that feels off is the camera. Of course, being that the game is 2D, you can't move the camera around. But it would have been nice if you could use the right analog stick to at least look around a bit. Like, for example, shifting a view around your character to get a better view of your surroundings. But as it stands, the view seems a bit too zoomed in for my liking, making it difficult to properly gauge the threats that were around you. If the game allowed me to zoom in and out at will, I feel like it would have been a bit more fair in the gameplay department. The graphics are, in all honesty, kinda bland. I get it that the game takes place on a space station, but everything just looks so blah. I'm noticing as I revisit PS2 games that a lot of the titles of that time also had the same kind of muddy graphics, but this one is especially dull. There's also not a lot going on in the sound department. Just mediocre radio voices giving you directions from a friend. Dutch's awful yet thankfully sparse one-liners, and what little bit of noises the alien make. The one odd thing is that the elevators you ride on announce what floor you're arriving at every time. It's interesting at first, but it does get old. Blowout isn't really worth the $3 I paid for it, sadly. It starts off promising, minus the plot, but after a few stages, you start to realize that it's just an exercise in frustration, which really comes down to the horrible controls. If they would have went for something a bit more conventional, the game might have been a bit more bearable. But as it stands, it's something fun for maybe an hour, but after that, boredom may set in, and you'll just want to move on to a different game. Final score? 3 out of 7. This is Reaper. Happy fragging.